once we start looking at, say, the small cap, mid cap index, the Russell 2000, here was your peak in January of 2022. This index is still in a bear market. So again, has not done anything on that small and mid cap basis. Does it mean it never will again? No, I'm not saying that at all. But if you've been invested in small and mid cap stocks, you've drastically underperformed that of the S&P and the NASDAQ. But here's what you need to know before the bell. We see a lot of data coming out. It's like, oh, valuations are cheap in international markets. Valuations are so cheap in emerging markets. Or, you know, the valuations in small cap, mid caps, relative large caps so cheap. Maybe. But, you know, where's been performance? So let's look back over the last 3 years, right? So let's go back 3 years and look at what markets have done over the last 3 years. So this is the S&P going back for 3 years. It's hitting all-time highs, right? So, you know, we've recovered. We had a peak back in 2022, went through 22, 23, have now recovered all that. So we spent about 2 years going nowhere, but you know, it's actually performing better. Again, overbought a lot of things. But, you know, real performance, of course, has been in the NASDAQ, because the NASDAQ is what's been driven by all these technology stocks. Obviously, a much bigger advance to new highs coming out of that decline that it had back in 2022. But again, making money here. So again, over the last 2 years, the S&P and the NASDAQ, you've made some money on a buy and hold basis. Not a lot, but you've made some on a buy and hold basis. This is where it starts to get interesting, because once we start looking at, say, the small cap, mid cap index, the Russell 2000, here was your peak in January of 2022. This index is still in a bear market. So again, has not done anything on that small and mid cap basis. Does it mean it never will again? No, I'm not saying that at all. But if you've been invested in small and mid cap stocks, you've drastically underperformed that of the S&P and the NASDAQ. And we can actually drill down. You take a look at emerging markets, right? So this is in industrialized international markets. So not as bad as small cap, mid cap, has recovered somewhat, but still below the 2022 high. So you're still have not made money in the international stocks over the last really 3 years. Same thing for emerging markets, actually probably the worst performing of all these indexes. Over the last 3 years, you were in a deep, deep bear market in emerging markets. Absolutely been a horrible place to be owning international emerging market stocks. So again, when we start looking at, you know, the bulk of this, you know, just look at pure small cap stocks. This is a small cap 600 index. Again, not really making a lot of progress in the small cap areas. So, you know, and this has been some of the issues about performance. Here's gold as an example. Gold's actually holding up here, but it hasn't really done much over the last 3 years, right? So you haven't really made money, haven't really lost money, but, you know, gold as a commodity has not been really tracking on a performance basis. So here's the thing about this. Look, we look at the earnings. We've talked about this earnings issue that's going on right now. And if you take a look at earnings, earnings are being driven by one sector of the entire market. This was part of our analysis that we went through yesterday here on the show, showing the big bifurcation between NASDAQ stocks and every other index and market that is available. So again, when we start looking at these long-term correlations, they're not holding up. And more importantly, as an investor, if you're trying to run, I got an email yesterday saying, I'm looking to build a diversified portfolio of all these different, you know, type of markets. That hasn't worked. And, you know, this is one of those markets that we're in where there's a very narrow group of stocks that are making money. The vast majority are not. And that makes it really challenging to manage a portfolio. So anyway, that's what you need to know before the bell this morning.